Welcome to Elevating Consciousness, the podcast that brings you mind-expansive conversations into the heart of what matters most. I'm your host, Artem, and our guest today is an inner work practitioner and founder of Intentional Society. After spending 15 years in software development, he became disillusioned with the corporate world and decided to pursue his passions. He launched Intentional Society, an online transformational community centered on developmental and relational practices. After over 150 weekly gatherings, the community has grown into a unique space for personal transformation and interpersonal exploration. James Baker, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Artem. Glad to be here.
Yeah. So I just want to set a bit of context before we start. I've been seeing your community, Intentional Society, bubbling up on the liminal web, and then our paths crossed in another online community that we're both a part of. I reached out to you and had a chance to have a conversation with you, and which I enjoyed. And we have an overlap in many interests from human development, transformational communities, and relational practices. And I'd love to talk about all these topics today, but maybe first you can start by sharing a little bit about your background and some of the pivotal events that have led you to starting Intentional Society and becoming the person that you are today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure. Sounds good. And how long do you want the 5-minute or 10-minute version? Or
yeah, whatever feels alive for you, because it's really just
all right. Let's see what comes out then. The story. I'll make a joke. I'll sort of skip over childhood with one joke of that kind of two defining characteristics. One, I was one of those quote unquote gifted kids that got pulled out to a separate school, and so I felt like, I'm smarter than everyone. And then the other defining factor was was religion, and was growing up in charismatic evangelical Christian denominations. So kind of a double dose of save the world. I was just kind of in the water as I was growing up. I was going to literally save everybody's souls, and maybe do so in part by being smarter than everyone and everything and figuring everything out. And that was just going to be anyway. It took me a few decades to kind of expand outward and get past kind of each of those, but I grew up, kind of being that quote unquote, bright kid, and took to watching Star Trek Next Generation, and I became enamored with computers and technology. Those late 80s, early 90s growing up, and that got me into college and into school, and did some AI in grad school, and switched from hardware to software, and was then that led me into the tech field, which then to condense another 15 years there, spent really a fascinating time, and it was quite an education, and in a sense I won a lottery there. Call it the startup lottery. As an employee, kind of lucked out and joined a small company that became a big company over time, and that was great financially, but also that was a great learning environment to be in a company that was growing and growing and growing, and every year things were breaking and changing about the processes and the way that things worked. And so that started to dawn on me after years of watching that, just like seeing everything change and seeing the system shift and the systemness of it all. So that ended up being, kind of my accidental backwards introduction to some of these inner development topics, adult development, psychology, the incentives, from the space of agile software development and agile and future of work and coaching of various kinds into the human stack and the psychological landscape and the inner incentive landscape that we're all dealing with. So I spent some years bridging the human side and the technical side of a large and growing system there, and came out of it in 2020. As well as so many things changed that year with the start of the pandemic there, but that was a great time for me to retire slash graduate slash resign and leave the corporate world to which I was rapidly losing fitness in a certain sense, and to come out of that, retire, help my kids with their remote classrooms during the pandemic, and after time and space to clear my head, found myself in a position where I want to keep going on my inner development journey. I want to keep growing. I want to do it with friends, make friends, do it with people, journey together on the seeking and practicing pathway, and to be of service in some way to the world. And so I guess that gets us about to the founding, the birth of Intentional Society at the end of that year.
Yeah. Thanks a lot for sharing all that, and it's just interesting hearing about like being in the startup environment, and this like very like everybody's hungry, and there's this growth going on, and all this complexity that's happening, and constantly solving new problems. And I imagine that there's a lot there in that system that's kind of translated and helped you in navigating intentional society and building intentional society. Yeah. And maybe you can give kind of like an overview of what intentional society is, what makes it unique as a online transformational community. Are there any premises that it's built on? Just kind of an overview.
Of course. Yeah, intentional society, the two words there, there's one part of intention, and intention is linked to awareness. And perhaps there's the intention gap that most of us face between who we are and who we want to be. And that we can see that there's some distance, some gap there. So that's one of the core ideas, and one of the reasons why we focus on inner development and inner work. And the other word, society, it's a little bit of a double word. Society can mean large, the world, society, but also it can just mean like club, the little society for such and such. And so dual usage there, but it is really centered on the relational aspect and the connective, the interpersonal, the what can we do together? And those two things go together so well, the inner and the inter-relational, because being witnessed and being in deep presence with other people and being reflected by them, seeing yourself through somebody else's eyes, through their perception and their perspective, and having that come back at you and mix with your own perception of yourself is fertile and generative ground for gaining or expanding our perspective on ourself, on our emotions, on the way that we relate to people every day in life, and the way that we interface with the world and all of the larger systems that we are a part of and in connection with. So that's really at the essence of intentional society. And the core hypothesis there was that we could take some of the theory of adult development theory, ego development, kind of the psychology, academia there, and combine that, marry that with the relational practices world, the authentic relating, the circling, the collective presencing that people were doing in kind of a more of a bottoms up kind of fashion, and take the bottoms up and the top down, theory to practice, practice to theory, and see if we can combine that in a warm and supportive relational community container. So that's the frame that we got going with 3.5 years. now and started meeting weekly over Zoom, distributed call, people across a bunch of different countries, and we've been meeting every week. Well, we take a one week off per quarter, but weekly since that time, and it has grown and unfolded into a few things since then.
Yeah, yeah. One of the things that you're saying, that I think you're saying, is that this aspect of the interpersonal, the relating with somebody else, and being able to see how you show up and how other people reflect you. There's something there that's very valuable, and maybe essential for us to be able to develop. Whereas if you're just trying to kind of like sit at home, I would say like kind of sit at home and just read books and meditate, which is what I did for a long time until I learned the circling practice. And then I was kind of hooked on that. I was like, whoa. I was like, this is a whole different level of development, because it's in the moment. It's like right in that moment, like you're communicating and being with certain emotions and seeing how you're showing up in the moment, which is very different than like sitting at home and like reading a book, or even meditating, like just sitting at home and meditating. Like there's something that's very different that happens in that interpersonal dynamic.
Absolutely. We're social animals, as they say, and so much of our wiring is wired up to that social interpersonal interface. And yeah, we've both done circling, and it can be pretty intense, right? Quite a workout.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. It's interesting, like first learning the practice, like there will be times where, oh, this is so enjoyable. Like I really like this. And then you'll have another session or another circle and you're like, whoa, that was uncomfortable, or that was boring, or I didn't like that, or that was being triggered by that. So doing the practice over many years, you just kind of see these waves and you're like, oh yeah, that's so representative of just experience. Like there's going to be things you like and things you don't like. And that's all part of growth.
Absolutely. I got triggered as hell like my second time, in a circling space. But the beautiful thing about it eventually is that it folds it all in. It just brings it all back in, whatever you're noticing, whatever you're feeling, whether you like or dislike the feeling, whatever it is, that's the practice. And that's there. And I think that's what's special and so able for that practice to hold such a wide variety of experiences, and for us to be able to integrate across many things.
Yeah. Beautiful. And so at this point, you've done well over 150 weekly gatherings. What have been some of the most surprising things you've learned through this process, whether it's about community, transformational practices, or yourself?
Mm-hmm. Small and large surprises over time unfolding. I'd say it's been, in one sense, completely unsurprising week by week. But then again, we have these things that they keep surprising us even as we experience them, right? We've experienced them before, but like, oh, we get back in contact with it and like, oh, that tastes so good. And you're back in it like, oh, what, so being with people, the quality, the presence, the sweetness of being in a space with folks who have, in some sense, a desire and a stance of unconditional positive regard toward each other, and even in doing so, back towards themselves, because we're usually very hard on ourselves, oftentimes. But being in that kind of presence and that space, tasting the tenderness of it's one of those, just a little bit like a splash of water in the face. Each time you come back into contact with it, and it's, oh my gosh, I wish my entire life could be like this quality of presence and connection with people. So that's just so primary there, that like first thing that comes to mind about like what's interesting, surprising, essential about the space. But lots of other things as well, and it's been a learning journey for me. I came out of the corporate world, quite quite unsatisfied with the traditional command and control, centralized decision making, the hierarchical structure of the corporate world, and the way that the power dynamics and things flow there. So the leading edge in the work world is flattening the hierarchies and becoming more egalitarian, trying to use all the brains a little more effectively, and distribute the decision making, the intelligence, the and that's as far as that's gotten, that's great. But there's definitely that kind of culture war still raging in the corporate workplaces of the world. But intentional society for me has been an exercise in my own leadership and my own growth and my own path in showing up with influence, with power. Like, oh, hey, I'm the guy that wrote this manifesto and like called these people together, and so I have this influence, but kind of reaching beyond, because there's a failure mode too of the egalitarian rebellion against the command and control hierarchy, where you end up in kind of a kumbaya type of circle where everybody is utterly equal, and you try to at least pretend that there's no differences, there's no dynamics there, and you kind of end up in this consensus mud of trying to absolutely agree about everything. Trying to reach, equality in all senses, and you kind of end up just bogging down. You don't know how to make decisions, you don't know how to move, and there can be a stuckness to that. So, that's been in my awareness since the beginning. But intentional society for me has been definitely a learning journey, and that dance of, okay, well, what's beyond that? How do you go beyond the kumbaya circle to reintegrate some of the wisdom, transcend and include some of the wisdom of the past stages of that, collective organizing mode of being together, and to embrace some of the natural social differences and dynamics of being together, to reach into a space of, in the last half of last year, we focused a lot in IS on leaderful culture. How do we bring our gifts, each of us, and bring our leadership forward? And how do I not lessen myself or withdraw myself as a leader in order to encourage, egalitarian, communal leadership? But how do we call each other in to bringing our own desires, our passion, our leadership into the space in a way that doesn't reduce each other, but expands the pie of volition and energy and leadership? So individually and collectively, that's been kind of a learning journey as we try to evolve the culture, the collective culture of this space, this shape, this community. The word is so overused and abused that it kind of almost means nothing. But like this communal space that we occupy together, how do we want to be, both as individuals and as a collective together?
Yeah, I think I heard you mention like community was, you were given a definition of community. It was something like community is a place where people know if you're missing or you're not there, something like that, right? I really like that definition. And I think so. I think some of the things that you were just saying was, coming from corporate and kind of functioning from this modern perspective, and then getting disillusioned with that this very hierarchical and just trying to get somewhere, and this kind of power dynamic that's seen in modern cultures, and then moving into a postmodern, a post-conventional kind of stance, and wanting to decentralize the power and wanting to step into more of like a relational landscape, and then being in that and then kind of seeing some of the limits there. And then I think that's where we start now moving into this conversation of what people, talk about like metamodern or integral, like how do we integrate these different levels of consciousness, these different ways of being, into something that includes and that can, look back on all these perspectives.
Exactly. And there's so many different labels and lenses that you can put on this, but we're we're all on this journey, and you can, to use words at all, you can have to put labels or stages onto so many things. But, yeah, in our mindset from modern to postmodern to metamodern, in the organizing of a group of folks, from hierarchy to egalitarian to, what is the, teal or future of work, or the folks that are trying to innovate in that space. There's the spiral dynamics, and there's talking about the culture clash of orange thinking, orange clockwork, mechanistic, modernistic thinking, and the green, the postmodern, the egalitarian, the values-oriented, the family feel, and into integral, whatever framing we're using, metamodernism, we can sense that something's there, and we're all reaching toward it in all these different domains and using all these different lenses. And sometimes I just like to zoom out on it. And if you zoom out, you start to see how they all sort of blur together. And there's this journey of cultural evolution and individual transformation, and how it's all wound up together, how it's all connected at this fractal of these different scales and scopes, and how that's the journey that we're all on together.
Yeah, what's in hearing you say that, what's coming up for me, like the fractal aspect, like intentional society being a fractal, or like these small communities being a fractal of bigger communities and countries, and then the world, and it's all like comes down into smaller scales. And we can do these experiments on a small scale and see how the dynamics, how one of the things it seems like is a lot of it is power dynamics, right? How do we play with power in a skillful way, right? Because how do we not deny it and act like it's not there, and realize that power dynamics are always there. Self-interest is always here. How do we play with the self-interest? How do we play with this power where we all become more powerful, right? How do we take this intelligence and multiply it, right, into collective intelligence, where it scales up and it actually becomes a win-win scenario for everybody. It's better for everybody.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and how we handle power and how we deal with power on an interpersonal level, an organizational level, is just, yet another microcosm of how we handle anything and how we handle everything, which whatever we can see and be aware of and turn towards, like, all right, we can work with it, we can integrate it, and whatever's in the shadow, whatever we can't see, or whatever we can't let ourselves see or let ourselves face. Those are the things that, then control us from the shadows, and end up with all the weird and icky, kind of yucky dynamics that emerge that we don't like. But much like in circling, whatever we can notice and bring out and put on the table and become aware of, then we have the chance, at least, to work with it.
Yeah. I hear you speaking about awareness and this aspect that it's. I think it was Anthony DeMello, the spiritual teacher Anthony DeMello, and he used to say, he's like, what you're not aware of controls you, and you're in control when you're aware of those things. I'm butchering the quote, but it was something like that. It was like,
yes. Well, I'm probably echoing and misusing that quote as well.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So, I'm curious also in, facilitating this community, what has been like the biggest challenge that you've come across over these couple of years? What do you find was like the most difficult thing in that process, if anything?
Mm-hmm. Well, I suppose what comes up for me pretty quickly is the desire, the longing that I have to really, it's underneath it. It's a desire to not be alone. It's a desire to be met, to be seen, to be known, and to be joined in peership and collaboration and co-creation by other folks, by other people. And so that's kind of tied in to the space and the journey. But yeah, for so many of us, so much of I don't know what we're accustomed to and what we're used to, whether it's in school, whether it's in the educational space or in the corporate space or wherever, is fitting in to the system by knowing your limits, by knowing your boundaries, and being in this permission seeking mode of, oh, okay, anything that's not in my box is one, maybe not for me to think about, above my pay grade or whatever phrase you want to use, and two, oh, something I need to ask permission for. Or I need to go like, oh, this is, it must be somebody else's responsibility. So if I don't go and have some sort of handoff of like, oh, I asked them to do this thing and they say, yes, you can do this thing. So we tend to have a lot of self-limiting beliefs that often we're just not aware of. It's just the norm. It's so much in the water in all of these conventional spaces. And so there's a certain aspect of, you could use the phrase like learned helplessness. And I don't know, that phrase kind of like sounds a little blamey, frankly, but like there's no blame that I want to attach to that. 'Cause it's just what we're enculturated into, socialized into in these systems. It's how we learn to be a good cog in the machine, how to be a good worker. But there's a lot of unlearning that comes with that too. And it's been a long journey for me. It was kind of that was happening for me in the corporate environment, as I was, noticing things breaking and changing over time, and as other people would sort of shrug and go, like, "Oh, just, what do you do? That's the way that things are." I was like, "Wait, but it was different 3 months ago. That's not just the way that things have always been and always will be." And so sort of that seeing through systems and seeing through the seeming solidity of the way that things are, and having a sort of like system awareness or construct awareness and kind of seeing the I don't know, almost the emptiness of these things and being able to see through them in a way. Anyways, it's quite a challenge and it's quite a growth journey. And there's this dance, especially socially, inside of intentional society or inside of any group of like, what sort of game are we playing together? And what are the norms and expectations of this group or of this culture that we're in? And can I step a little bit forward? And then how do people react? Does anybody look offended? Did I overstep anything? No? Okay, all right. Well, then maybe they'll take a little step forward too. Kind of that dance of like loosening and unlearning and unfolding this space into a space where collectively any individual can take action, can feel moved in the sense almost of like the spirit moves you, or you feel called, your heart starts beating a little faster. It's your signal. It's your full it's your full wisdom of your body mind system signaling. It's your nervous system signaling to you. They're like, oh, there's something important here. There's something I care about. Make this move. Do this thing. Voice this piece of information into the system. And anyway, I'm getting a little preachy there, but kind of trying to point in that direction of, as we talk about power and leadership, and and how do we step into that space, and how do we step into leadership together without stepping on each other's toes. But actually, stepping on toes is good. It's the boundaries. It's touching those boundaries, right? And you can do a little oops, ouch there. It's like, oh, okay, that I felt something. A little something on my toe there. But being able to work with those edges and bring them out and just relax into a space together, it feels good when we can do it. And when we can't do it, it feels all awkward and icky and sort of like limiting and cringy. But if you can notice that and name that and put that out there again, it becomes workable again, and you're back into the space of like, everything is workable. So, gets back. I mean, maybe that gets back to and points to the 3-word model that we have, the growth model that we've evolved in intentional society. I keep almost referring to it, so should we bring it out?
It would be great to hear that.
Yeah. And I keep trying to refine this into kind of a shorter and shorter, story or explanation. And really the three words themselves, they are awareness, already mentioned, acceptance, and integrity. And whether this is in the micro of you go through these steps in 30 seconds, or whether this is a deep personal transformation that takes place over years, I seem to see, and we seem to see, the patternness of these motions that from the awareness stage where we can first, sense something and become aware of something that we weren't even conscious of before then, that brings it into our space. And then how do we react to it? How do we interface with it? So often there's a flinching, a turning away, a defending or a running from discomfort and things that arise in that way. But if we can practice acceptance, there's a welcoming move, there's a turning towards move. That is so, so key to so much of growth and development and transformation. It's the turning towards that undoes the finger trapness of, if you have your two fingers in a little tube, type mechanism, and you pull, the tighter you pull, the harder you pull, the tighter it's going to grip your fingers. But it's the paradoxical, counterintuitive pushing into it, moving towards it, that loosens it, that makes it workable, that is just the key. And that frees us then to choose, to cohere, to move into a space of greater integrity, of integration, integrating whatever the thing is, moving into a new coherence, to be able to act in line with our values and have our exterior and our interior aligned and just top to bottom in integrity. So I have found that to be like, that's the biggest thing that we've learned over the first 3 or so years of intentional society is, that is so key. Awareness, acceptance, integrity, and whatever words, and there's a ton of different ways to lens it and to put different words on it and different motions and everything from psychology to wisdom, traditions to ancient religions to these. You zoom out again, and like these all start looking like they're kind of pointing at the same kind of thing, and so that's what we fall back on. Whenever the edginess arises, and it's great to walk out to our developmental edges and play at those edge zones and spaces. But if we find ourselves tipping over or falling over into overwhelm or getting too much, we fall back on that awareness, acceptance, integrity. Where are we? What kind of move can we make to bring things back into that learning zone of proximal development?
Yeah. So awareness, it being that we noticing what's here in our experience, and especially if we're noticing something that's difficult in our experience, being able to accept that, okay, I'm being triggered right now, and accepting that, and then thinking about how do I move forward? How is my behavior, or how is this interaction in integrity or out of integrity, or how do I integrate this experience now and learn from it? So that's how it's landing in me. And there's a couple of other things you were saying that were interesting. About the fact that in interpersonal, in like our social relationships, there's certain conventions, and some of what you're doing in circling or in intentional society or with any of these practices, you're kind of pushing on these conventions. You're like, well, can we step a little bit outside of it? Can we step a little bit outside of it? And we're kind of stretching a little bit. And one of the things that I've often heard in circling, people say that, well, circling is not really a safe space, right? It's a brave space, right? You're stepping in here and it's like, things might kind of trigger you, or things might you might not like things. People aren't trying to be nice, right? We're just kind of speaking our truth. And sometimes it might land in a way where somebody doesn't like it. But I am curious how you've navigated this aspect between, being a warm, supportive, and maybe somehow providing psychological safety, which is very necessary for people. And, especially when people have a lot of trauma, they could very easily go over that line where they lose that psychological safety. And we all have a different threshold for how unsafe we can feel. So how do you balance that kind of moving past conventions and moving past boundaries, stepping on toes, and then, also not hurting people or helping people out when they're like overwhelmed?
Yeah. Yeah, well, our spin on that, very common like debate and characterization of what kind of space is this is that we are neither a safe space exactly, nor a brave space exactly, but we value what we call meta safety. And that is the okayness to not be okay and to be okay about the not okayness. And if you need another layer of recursion, you can recurse again, and again, it's the what can you name? Your example just a second ago of like saying, oh, I notice I'm feeling triggered right now. Like that's very different than you're just being inside of it and it comes out as rawr, just like whatever, emotional outpouring from the trigger, from your nervous system in fight or flight saying, do this, and going to that just like fused strategy there. But if you're able to step back and say, I notice I'm feeling quite angry right now. Like, all right, that's a layer of remove there. And okay, and maybe you do feel brave enough to say that, to name that. And maybe you don't feel even like brave enough to bring that out at the point in time. So all we say is that we value meta safety. And if you have the okayness at this layer to say, I notice I'm feeling angry or whatever emotion, like, okay, great. If you don't feel like you can make that move, can you notice that you feel like you can't make that move? And can you name that, like, I notice right now that I'm struggling with, whether I should share something or not. Like you didn't even say the like I'm angry thing, but like there's another step of remove. And can you access that? Great. If you can't, eventually you will. We can come back to it. If you really like, if you're inside of something, we say like, take care of yourself first, hang up the call, do whatever you need to come back to yourself and regulate and self-soothe. But to be able to bring that back into the space whenever we do have that holding, whether we've made object of that thing, whatever it is that's happening. And when we're able to bring that object back into this space, we can just set it out there in between us, in front of us. And then we can hold it together and we can support each other in holding it. And if somebody in IS says, I notice I'm feeling something, real strong right now, the response is, there's a kindness there. There's a space holding for it. And even if you come out with just a rah, 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 I hate you, I don't know, that's, extreme there. People are going to kind of go, oh, okay, whoa, okay. What can we notice about this? What can we hold? What can we make space for? But especially if it doesn't come out as a direct, very attacking, cutting kind of interaction, we found that it's pretty easy actually. And at least in our culture and in our space, in our community, it's very much a norm for us. Okay, great. Somebody's feeling triggered. Cool. What kind of space can we give them? And what kind of support? And we don't need to push them. We've gravitated, our center of gravity, towards more of a supportive and a pull model. Hey, there's something already pulling on you. It's not our job. We don't need to poke you and prod you and provoke you into, going out to some edge or past some edge or losing. Like, that's not what's needed, but giving each other a kind and welcoming space to deal with triggers and feelings and emotions and conflict, in fact, has been so successful, I would say, that we've had people talk about conflict and how do you do conflict resolution and how do you do mediation, and I'm almost like, we have so few examples of actually something that that feels like conflict resolution, because if you are able to name it as it arises, we can feel like we're on the same team and on the same side together. And so often, and that doesn't feel like conflict. I'll say conflict is not a thing. Conflict is a feeling. Conflict is a state or an experience. That's not 100% true, but I'm just going to like lean into that here of conflict is a feeling. And if you don't feel that fight or flight, if you don't feel that escalating conflict energy and tension inside of you, then so much becomes easy and possible to work with. Even the conventionally like seemingly intractable of somebody just like, oh, I just have this feeling that I don't like you, or like that would be like really verboten to say in an office or a classroom or something like that. But if we are able to hold this from a perspective, and perspective taking is so key to the whole growth journey, from a perspective of like, oh, I am experiencing a judgment of you right now. That framing right there, it's not identified with you. It's not your identity, so you're not invested in it. Oh, I notice this thing happening. I have it, rather than I am this thing. Being able to, oh, I have this thing. I don't know. It just unlocks so much space and spaciousness to work with all of this.
Yeah, that's beautiful framing. I like how you laid all that out. And there was a couple of things that were coming up. Like, I was just in a circle yesterday, and the facilitator, she was sharing this. Like, sometimes there's something really like challenging that comes up for us in circling, and we don't know how to bring it. Like, right, we don't have like the courage, or we feel like we don't know how to say it. Like, oh, it might really hurt somebody. So she came up with this model that she calls onioning. And basically, it's like you can give the top layer of the onion. Like, you don't have to go deep into it. You could give the top layer of the onion where it's like, well, I'm with this really difficult thing, and like I'm really struggling to say it right now. And just bringing that already is bringing awareness to something.
Yeah. So yeah, I love the onion metaphor there, and yeah, it's also kind of the going meta move. If you can't name the thing at this level, pop up a layer. And can you name the thing from that layer? Absolutely.
Yeah, and that's the thing with awareness. Like, awareness, I feel like, is always meta, and we can collapse, right? We can collapse into a part. We can blend with a part. We could collapse into our thoughts, but there's always this capacity, and this ties back to what you were saying before, being okay with being not okay. And it's like, there's always this ability to go beyond it, to go meta. And there was another thing that you were saying that I found interesting. It's like when we're circling with somebody, and it's like whether we have a judgmental thought about somebody or somebody else has it, like it's just so interesting to see that, oh, it's just a thought. Like, we all have judgmental thoughts and they just pop up, and it's like just being able to see it, like, wow, that's a judgmental thought. And I remember I was circling with somebody, and they were saying like, oh, I'm having judgment. And I'm like, oh yeah. I'm like, that's interesting. Like, you're having a judgmental thought. And it's like, that's not you. Like, you're not necessarily choosing that. It's just bubbling up. It just happens to bubble up. And seeing in that way is very liberating. It's just like, okay, because a lot of times we feel guilty about that. It's like, if I have judgmental thoughts, it's like, I shouldn't have judgmental thoughts. I'm such a bad person, like, right? But it's like, it's just bubbling up. It's like a lot of the thoughts are bubbling up. Now, whether if I identify with that and then I act in a certain way and do something that's harmful, that's a different story. But just, there's something so innocent about just thoughts. Like, they're just bubbling up and they're just there.
Yeah. And yet we tend to grow up into some, so much of a control kind of space where we're beating ourselves up for the thoughts that we're having. And, you know, I love the word you used, liberating. Like seeing through that, seeing that that's what's happening, and seeing that we can just not do that to ourselves creates such a liberating like feeling of space and expansiveness and freedom of like, oh man, this feels so good. I was so tightly constricted before, and now it feels relaxed and spacious. And I don't know how else to describe it. I keep coming back to that space, physical space metaphor for the emotional, the psychological feeling of being released from that kind of, I don't know, self-boxing.
Yeah. So I'm curious, what do you find are like commonalities in those who end up becoming intentional society members?
Right. Definitely the number one thing is that that drive, I'd say kind of that seeker drive. But you don't have to, you can identify as a practitioner just as much as a seeker. You don't have to have not found the thing. But there's this motivation, this drive that we maybe see that there is a journey of growth and that journey feels good and it leads to greater capability and capacity for us to handle and hold things. And so we want to keep going on that journey. And so being on the self-development journey and looking to find the others to collaborate, practice, co-journey together with, that's absolutely the number one thing that brings people into intentional society and helps the community to cohere. Because that's ultimately whatever we're doing on a particular day, that is still ultimately what we are here in service of. And then yes, it's a wonderful culture, and in part, it's a wonderful space to be, in part because of the self-selection effect of people who are on this journey have been doing the work, in their own life and have been on that journey and have seen a few things here and there. So there's a fairly high waterline for emotional and psychological intelligence and self-awareness and being able to make the onion moves of going meta, being able to name things and see things you don't need a lot to come in and to participate in a culture. There can be a group field and a group, culture of norms and expectations that draws you into it, even if you don't have it sort of, nailed and stabilized, that you can just like retain that kind of presence and awareness no matter what sort of, uncomfortable thing is happening. But like in the space of a group, as long as you have some experience with being able to like, oh wait, I can hear somebody say something about their experience of me and not be so tightly fused that I can't hear that. As long as you can hear something and work with it, then like recursively everything becomes workable. And it's pretty easy to, go up the layers of that onion if you've seen that there are layers and that there is just that core capacity. So yeah, you don't have to, be too tall to like ride the ride, like amusement theme park rides. It's not a high bar. It feels like, at least. Perhaps there is a sort of like you either see it or you don't see it, even for that kind of, min bar level of awareness. If people just like, what are you even talking about? Like, okay, I guess I pointing at the moon is sometimes difficult. And, if we don't recognize, if we don't already see it, then it can be hard to hear or recognize from somebody else's description of it. But But there's something that, yeah, that people in intentional society and many other spaces like share of like, oh, I have experienced that thing in my own growth journey. And I've had that inner space, that state. And like, oh, yes, have you too? Oh, yeah. We've seen that thing together. And there's that mutual recognition of like, aha. And if we've seen the same moon, then that can cover a multitude of like different, slightly different angles of finger pointing or different, shapes, sizes, or natures of the pointers that we use.
Yeah, when you say the thing, what do you mean by that? Is that that's the moon that you're pointing to?
The thing, I suppose the primary thing that I'm referring to here is the existence of layers, the existence of growth or development or transformation. Pick your favorite word for it, but we're on a journey. And we don't stop as, I don't know, people say that, quote that little statistic like, oh, when you're 25, then your brain takes until age 25 to mature your prefrontal cortex, and then you're done. Well, like, no, you're still not done. We keep going. Our systems, even in a, mechanistic, like neural network systems in our brains of neurons, like those keep adapting. Those keep making new connections and new abstractions and seeing new layers. So if there's something about the core of making object of something that we were once lost in sight of, and seeing that there is some sort of process like that, call it growth, development, whatever you want, that's probably the biggest thing, the ineffable, unnameable thing that you kind of have to experience or see to know that it's there. And once you see it, though, it unlocks so much. And there are other things out there. We can sort of apply recursively the thinginess to how do you look at the world and how do you make sense of humanity and global culture and the mindsets and views that we're in as a species, as humanity, and what are the big solutions to the big problems, and what is the recursion on the treating our problems like problems is a problem that compounds the problems, kind of thing there. And there are other things to point to, but maybe that's the biggest one.
Yeah. So it sounds like what you're talking about is being developmentally aware. That's what I call it. I call it being developmentally aware. And another way to say that is, understanding what developmental stage theories are pointing to, understanding what developmental psychology has revealed. And, it's this notion, like you said before, we don't stop developing ever. Like there's never a time, there's always this potential and capacity for our awareness to expand. There's always a potential for our certain skills to develop or certain lines of intelligences to develop. And it seems like that's almost like the prerequisite for people coming into intentional society or wanting to engage, is like maybe coming across this idea of development as it's laid out in developmental stage theories, and like, oh wow, like once you see that lens, you're like, you can't unsee it,
Yeah. And you don't even have to, by the way, buy into stages or the stagedness of stage theory. Some people don't know, like there are a variety of different stage theories as well. Hey, pick your favorite one or reject them all, and call growth a development, an incremental, continuous process. But just that there is something happening, and seeing it and pointing at that, absolutely, as you say, developmental awareness.
Yeah. So I'm curious if you've heard of this framing, but this is pretty interesting. And I spoke to this guy Bruce Tift on one of my podcast episodes a couple of episodes back. He wrote this book, Already Free, and he's licensed marriage family therapist, been a practicing therapist for many years, also a longtime Vajrayana practitioner. And in this book, he basically says that there's these kind of two paths, right? You have the developmental path, which is a lot of times equated with like what you would do in therapy, right? It's like looking at your shadows and your psychological things, and it's like very much becoming and growing up, right? Like in Wilber's language, the growing up stuff. And then there's the fruitional, which is, you're already complete, you're already whole in this moment, and there's actually nowhere to go, or there's nobody to become, and there's nothing broken about you, and there's nothing to fix. So it's becomes very kind of paradoxical. So it's interesting, like there's these almost two different views. And I noticed for myself, historically, I very much prioritize the developmental view, right? Like I need to get better, like this kind of self-improvement paradigm, or I need to see more of my shadows, or I need to be more aware, whatever it is, right? So it's just interesting seeing that, how those two things, those two paths can kind of come together, but also how they could be different, and how I feel like we prioritize development. Like we prioritize the developmental, the therapeutic kind of path. It's like, I have to become better.
Right. And I take a kind of functional usefulness approach to it. Which one is more useful in any given moment? If you ask me which of those models is true, the developmental growing from less complete to more complete, or the already complete, which of those is true? Yes. Both of those. Absolutely. And for a certain range of perspectives, one or the other is not going to make sense. You talk to folks and go like, oh, you already have everything that you need within you. A certain, high fraction of folks are just going to be like, hey, what are you BS? What are you talking about? Like, that's just like, does not compute. Doesn't make any sense at all. And yet, it's true. It's true. And that doesn't make the other view untrue. So there's a both andness there. And that broke my brain. That breaks, I think, everybody's brain that, is running into that kind of paradox holding, and getting more comfortable with the ability to both and things that are seemingly incompatible with each other, but recognizing the contextual dependence, or even the codependent arising, of things in a certain way. That, it's just what serves you right now, and there's even I've been coming more into contact with Alethea, and I know you've had Steve March and talked with him, and I really love the word unfoldment in there as one of the approaches, because oftentimes you have a polarity and you're doing polarity management. You have a good thing and they seem like they're in tension. How do you integrate the two? Well, you can't really. It's not a problem to solve. You can't just like, boom, there, I solved it, and now it all makes sense. You're balancing back and forth between the poles of a polarity, but oftentimes there's some amount of deconstruction and reconstruction that you can do into a new integration or a synthesis, thesis, antithesis, synthesis. And the word unfoldment for this polarity in particular points to me at there's something of here's a way in which they're both true. Unfolding it kind of implies like, everything's already there, but maybe it's like curled up like flower petals. And like the unfurling of a flower and its petals, there's a move, there's a motion that we make that you could call development or growth, but maybe it was already there in a sense, but also it's still, it looks very different. It looks like a change. And so in that way, there's sort of a bothness nature to that. So I lately am appreciating that word of unfoldment for how it kind of tries to include both sides of that, seeming dichotomy.
Yeah, I appreciate you framing this in the both and like how both of them are true, and depends what view is useful when, like this very pragmatic stance. And it's interesting because it's not just like certain people can't like grasp that. I feel like at certain times for me, like the fruitional view is very like evident. It's like, oh yeah, everything's complete, everything's whole. And then other times I'm just like, I can't, like I can't take that view. Like I'm struggling to take that view. I'm like, oh no, I do need to be better. Oh no, I need to. There is a problem to solve. It's very clear that there's a problem that needs to be solved. So it's just interesting to see that.
Yeah, and it's like koans, right? Just kind of contemplating the perhaps seemingly nonsensical, but actually integratable. Like I like the Ramdas quote of the world is perfect, exactly as it is, including my desire to change it. And it's kind of that koan-ish of like, breaks your brain. Can it be true? Well, yes and no and yes. And you oscillate back and forth, a whole bunch of times. But there's something that it points to. Like, oh yeah, these things can be combined in some way.
Yeah, I've been fascinated with paradox, and I remember like years ago when it was just like I would start getting this thought like, oh, this is a paradox. Like it would literally be the thought this, and by this meaning like all of existence or all of life, like something about it that's paradoxical. And that was like the very beginning before like actually going deeper into that and really seeing like how true that was and like unfolding into that paradox. But yeah, it's just interesting like that how things are like beyond reason. I think that's what it was for me, like the conventional when the conventional reality models started to kind of start cracking, whereas like before it's like, oh, I can figure everything out with logic and reason, and then that's when the paradox starts creeping in. It's like, no, you can't. No, you can't. Like this is unreasonable. Like this is if you just look into experience deeply, it's like none of this is reasonable. The fact that we're these, these animals, like these intelligent animals sitting here having this dialogue on this computer in this like just existence, like just everything is just so profound. It's beyond reason. The way that everything works, the way that everything comes together, it's unfathom. You can't fathom it. You can't like put it together in any way, in any sensible way. Yeah. So just that, like when that starts, creeping in, that to me is like, that's the post-conventional shift in a way. Like that's one way to think about it.
Yeah. Yeah. Still breaks my brain. Or at least my left brain rational, my McGilchrist, left hemisphere, kind of lens of the rational logical. But yeah, being in computers, I read Gödel, Escher, Bach, and learned about the incompleteness theorem, and like, oh, there it is, incomplete. You can't like, all right, breaks my brain right there. And yeah, whether it's that or whether you're just sort of contemplating, as I did for a few decades, why is there something instead of nothing? Is another one of those questions of like, I just hit this limit. I don't know. It doesn't make sense in this frame. This is that all I can see, all I can know. But like,
yeah. How could there be no beginning and no end? Like, just contemplating that in itself is like the timeless,
Yeah.
the boundless. It's definitely a brain breaker.
Right.
So I'm curious, are there any trends that you predict will happen in transformational online communities in the near future? Is there anything that you're seeing? I feel like this, it is still a very new thing. I mean, like I feel like like Facebook groups and stuff like that have been around for a while, but more like now you're seeing the Circle, the Mighty Networks, the Discord, the Zoom stuff. Like we're now like Zoom's kind of fairly new thing. And the fact that people are gathering and meeting up and, it's still a new thing. So I'm wondering if you see it going in a specific way. Do you see it growing, expanding? Is it always going to be like this niche kind of thing? I often wonder that about like circling, for example. Like, circling has been around for a while and hasn't really become much bigger than it's been. Will it get bigger? And so
There are a few things that I can definitely see, and there are also a few things, maybe by definition, that I can't see. But I can respond to that and say that first, technology will continue to accelerate things. I've appreciated and benefited from the side effect of, that COVID brought us, Zoom and acceptance and, more prevalence of video conferencing technology. So that I think has enabled and unlocked me to find other people around the world and us to find each other. And technology, in as a general rule, like, it's this amplifier and it's this accelerator. And so change will continue to happen. Change will continue to accelerate is probably a good bet as well. Things will get weirder faster. Just, I don't know what kind of weirdness, and it's going to be weird, but I have a pretty high confidence that, like, weirdness will continue to accelerate. And what we are accelerating, I'm going to point at the phenomenon of cultural evolution in the large. And like, it took us, as maybe thousands and thousands of years earlier in history, and then kind of there was like the axial age, religions coming online, 1000 to 200 BC, and for 1,000, 2,000 years really being dominant. The transition into modernity, maybe around 500 years ago, and then postmodernism, just having this short window post World War II era, and like, cultural evolution itself is speeding up. Circling, intentional society, other things in this scene and this network here, these things are at the fringe right now. They're absolutely at the bleeding edge of explorers exploring the edge of culture. But there's absolutely this adoption curve and this cultural evolution that's been happening for thousands of years and is going to continue and has accelerated greatly, and I think is going to continue to accelerate as the world keeps shifting and moving faster, and we need to catch up with this wisdom gap that seems to have emerged between the capacity of our wisdom as individuals and as a species to hold the technological power that we have developed and has advanced so rapidly. So we're out here, we're finding each other, and I do predict that the movement is going to grow and is going to accelerate. And what I can't know is, I'm too in it. I'm too on the inside of it to know, like, well, how far is this reaching in the world, and what will the growth rate be, and how will the conditions and the pull of the existential risk and the political turmoil and the various stimuli out in the world, how fast will that pull us forward? I don't know. And I very much am not in a good position to look out over the whole curve, the whole distribution of people on this planet and say, where are people and how will culture move and how quickly will it move over the next few years, a few decades, few centuries. I hope we have a few centuries and that we don't blow ourselves all up in one way or another. Through this race of technology, power and wisdom that is happening. But I foresee a next few years of fruitful movement building and scene amplifying and connecting across this meta network, this liminal web, this, whatever we want to call it, liminal web and beyond. That will continue, and that we're pointing at moons and recognizing each other in what and legibilizing and understanding and coming together and being able to better describe what it is that we've experienced and what we're pointing to and what we're talking about together as a scene. We will continue to advance with that. And thus, hopefully, things just keep shifting along that curve of cultural evolution, and we are participants in it. We're not controlling it. We're not drivers of it, but we are dancers in a large, complex dance, and we can dance our parts and play our parts in this. And we don't control it, but neither do we have zero influence and zero impact. And so how we are within ourselves and with each other and within our communities and our systems, it all matters, depending on the lens that you take on meaning and meaningfulness. But I don't know. I'm having fun. I can tell that you're having fun, and that you are, advancing this edge as we are together in some sense. And absolutely, those trends are going to continue. I've seen it, and I've felt it over the last 3.5 years, and even before. And people who have been, I want to say, like in this field for 2, 3, 4 decades, talking with them, I hear some similar things from them as well. But again, we're so close to it and we're in it that we can't be objective about it. We can say what we're seeing, and it seems to be accelerating, but we're all on this ride together.
Yeah, well, I'm curious about, you use the word cultural evolution. I'm wondering how that maps with development. I think I've heard people talk about how evolution and development are different. I'm not remembering the nuance of that, but I'm wondering if you're using that in the same way.
I think so. I think there's a difference between individual personal development and what I'll say, call cultural evolution. And the two are related to each other. I spent a few years kind of beating my intellectual brain against the individual, the psychology and the adult development and the individual theorizing and the social, the integral, the spiral dynamics, the cultural evolution kind of stuff. And they, people even make maps of like, oh, this stage is this level and this stage is this level. And it sort of works if you really squint hard enough, but they're also not the same thing, in my personal opinion. And I think they're kind of like at this 30-degree angle to each other. They're not the same angle, and they're not totally orthogonal to each other either. But they are related. They correlate with each other, and there's some sort of tricky looping, complex system here, dynamic feedback loop of it is inner development in individuals that allows cultural evolution to shift. And then you can talk about cultural evolution and tipping points. And do you need 4% of people at this certain, perspective to, allow it to really start to influence society or the elites or the power structures, the institutions in society. And then how does it, and we've got this big old, spectrum of diversity in the cultural evolution. We have all of these V-memes or, cultural perspectives, worldviews, whatever you want to call them. They're all here. They're all still with us. The traditional, the modern, the postmodern are all here. And they're all also inside of each one of us. It's not like we just can count the people of oh yeah, these people are postmodern and these people are modern or traditional or whatever. You can't do that abstraction either. We all have the spectrum, the distribution within ourselves. And so it's this impossibly complex dance of how do these two things relate at these two different scopes, these two different layers of the onion, these two different levels of the fractal. But zoom out far enough, and they are the same thing. It's growth and it's development, but different mechanisms and different stories and kind of different states and stages that I would use in talking about individuals versus societal level collectives. I don't know if that helps.
Yeah, for sure. And one of the things that was kind of also coming up is, you were talking about things accelerating and things kind of getting more complex. And, there's information overload, which I struggle with. I feel like that's one of the most difficult things as a creator to deal with. And in that, there's something there that there's probably a bigger need for an ecology of practices, for transformational community, for these kind of things. Whereas before, maybe these things were more fringe. It feels like that's, even like mindfulness has become like this big thing. It's people are so stressed out, people are so overwhelmed. Like mindfulness and yoga is like a popular thing, right? So I wonder if these other practices will continue to kind of grow, because if not, it's like then that's where existential risk really starts coming in, because now we're just so confused. We're so overwhelmed. We don't know how to make sense of things, right? So you need more of this ability to center, this ability to ground, this ability to be in communion and in interaction with other people, this ability to tap into collective intelligence so we can deal with this complexity, because we can't solve somebody's problems and somebody's issues on our own. So yeah, I'm wondering if that is going to be the movement that's going to keep, that these things are going to keep unfolding in that way. Or if not, it might be kind of the end for us, this experiment.
Right. It's absolutely true in one sense that if we collapse individually inside of it, if it's too complex and we can't figure it out and we just sort of collapse, shove ourselves back from the table and go, screw it. It's just like, and react from whatever sort of collapsed state, that maps it directly to collapse as a species or collapse as a civilization even. And it's absolutely true that there is that link there. And also just like, let's all become more conscious. And if we all, raise our consciousness vibrational level high enough, then spontaneously the world will be saved. It doesn't quite work that way either. And so there's a falsity to that as the everything as well. It's not monocausal. It's not the answer, the solution, but it's absolutely part of the puzzle. And we can see the connection. There's this vast scale difference between us as individuals here in this moment and in our lives, in our daily lives together, and the vast civilization, globe-spanning civilization that we are a part of. But we can see the similarities, and it is true that they're connected. And so, yeah, we can do our part in a sense, but really we don't have to do our part. We just have to move towards what feels good in a certain sense, move toward what helps us to reach the freedom and the spaciousness and the liberation that we feel that we can handle our lives and our challenges as individuals. And I have a whole lot of faith that if we can attune that way as individuals, and if we can follow that attunement, that sense of integrity and always towardness, toward integrity, that I think we'll have the capacity, I think we'll have the ability, the capability, whether we exercise it or not, in our institutions and our power centers and our civilizations, that's what will give us the capacity to exercise our capabilities to then hold our nations and our civilization and our society in the space of enough wisdom to, I'm going to come back to be who we want to be as humanity, in addition to individuals.
Yeah, well said, James. And it's been a wide-ranging conversation. We've spoke about intentional society, your transformational community, some of your journey in that kind of corporate space and moving more into post-conventional meaning making and developmental theories, relational practices, the future of transformational community. We've kind of explored all these topics. And before we wrap up, I have one more question for you. Let's imagine that it's your last day alive on Earth. And once you're gone, everything you have ever done or created, including intentional society, will disappear along with you. However, you are granted the power to share a short message that the whole world will hear. What would that message be?
Okay, so the world's not ending,
Yeah,
just
just you,
me.
just your world.
Yeah, yeah. Hmm. Just breathing into that. I think I would say using a we language, using the language of us, even though I'm going to disappear. I'm going to no longer be here. But I'll say to us, we can open our eyes. If we can open our eyes and move toward what we see, which we might not very much like, even as we look around, read the news, see the news of what's happening every day, we might not like it. But if we can move toward what we can see, embrace it, envelop it, if we can grow big enough to hold these things, then we're going to be okay. And we can reach that, we can access that as individuals, even in this present day world, day by day, as we go, we can be okay. No matter what is happening out there in the world, no matter what is happening in the material circumstances of our lives. The message that I want to leave is that we can be okay and find that okayness, such an inadequate word. We can reach that peace, we can reach that capaciousness, that spaciousness, and we can be there no matter what. And if you do that, and if we do that, we can be who we want to be. And that is my wish. My selfless wish. I'm going to be gone tomorrow, and everything I've done will be gone. I still care. I love you, and I wish you all of the capacity, all of the integrity, acceptance, awareness that you can find, that we can find together. And best wishes in living, growing, dancing forward into the future, whatever it holds for us. We participate in the unfolding of life itself. Thanks.
Beautiful. Thanks so much, James. Thanks so much for coming on the show.
It's been a pleasure.
Appreciate you.